Chapter 3 Summer 878 I'll get beaten if I bring back rotten herring. Osrith called down to Gert, the fisher-boat's boy at the quay from the lower wall of the castle. Take them back and bring fresh ones. The flaxen-haired boy stared up at Osrith, his big round eyes staring at her, disappointed. Bring better fish and I'll come down, Osrith called, then darted away from the wall and hid in the shadow. It was not true that she would be beaten. If the cook so much as laid a hand on her she would hit him back. But Glimmery, the huge, bad-tempered man, had never raised as much as his voice to her from the first day King's General Sainid had deposited her with the servants, her father's sword in the cellars with the rest of the armory. Within an hour of the battle ending, with Vicary to the Picts, Osrith had been taken into Dunnottar Castle by Sainid, shown her duties, her corner to sleep in and a plate of food. Osrith had found that near her corner a loose floorboard led to an underground spring, a loose stone at the bottom of which was large enough to hide her silver. That had been over a year ago. It had taken Osrith several weeks of sleepless nights to realize that she was not being followed, nor would be found out as a missing girl from the noble family at Bibbenberg. It had taken her a few more to speak to the servants. Osrith had kept silent for a long time, listening to the words within the castle, so like English, yet, just out of reach. At first, many thought she was dumb, but Glimmery and the woman in charge of the household, Elasad, found she picked things up quickly, and in no time she was speaking the Pictish tongue and, by listening to the nobility, by finding little places to hide and observe the happenings in her new home, Glig too. For, Osrith soon found out, when she had been elevated to position of companion to Constantine, the royal family, though Pictish, followed the Dulreadan traditions, as established by Constantine's grandfather Sainid mac Alpin, and had accepted the throne when no suitable ruler presented themselves, the last being killed by the Norwegian blade of Ivar the Boneless. It had taken Osrith several weeks to become accustomed to her life in Dunnottar, the monastery of Culdees over the river, an ever-constant reminder that she had fled Bibbenberg, and she forced herself into invisibility, performing her duties, however tedious, however horrible, without fuss or favor. She had escaped once, and it was only a matter of time, if things got difficult, that she could plan her escape again. The castle cook was ever her defender, and took her side against Elasad if ever there was a dispute, and Osrith liked him. She did as he told her, and never complained even when there were gizzards to pull from game birds, and he fed her well, and rewarded her with time off, or gifted her easy jobs. Osrith's favourite of these was going to market half a mile up the Dee early in the morning, when the mist was lifting from the river and traders and merchants were just opening. She walked amongst the ordinary folk, listened to their speech, smelled the vapours from manufacturers, leather workers, blacksmith and herbal stores. She talked to traders, merchants, men and women alike, including the folk whose tongues spoke words of a forbidden following, that of the earth and sky and sea. When she'd asked Glimmery what it was, he told her in his gruff manner, that it was paganism, not that of the Norse and Danes, but of long ago in the land, and that to practice it was forbidden by the king. It is against Christianity, he had told her. They have resisted God's word, they are damned. Osrith was also free to read, as she used to at Bibbenberg, in Dunnottar's chapel, delighting in finding in books the same words, the same tales, of the Romans, and the coming of her people, those from Jutland and Frisia, of Angleland and Saxony. In these texts, Osrith found, though the Latin words told the stories, a translation in Cymric existed, and, Osrith realized, these Latin missives, letters and historical accounts were shared between monastery, cathedral and chapel as holy people gossiped with one another from kingdom after kingdom. Somewhere, Osrith imagined, comfortingly, if Father Becker was still alive, he might be reading the same history just then as she was. Osrith could make out a little, but of what she could read, the text made it clear the godly Gaels, Picts and Cymric should turn their efforts to the barbarian pagans, the Angles and Saxons, and all should be done to eliminate their kind. But Osrith's favourite time of the week was when the Frisian fishing traders, who brought the castle its fish, tied up at the castle's harbour. Since English and Frisian were so alike, Osrith had found she could converse without difficulty with them, and asked them about the weather, their catches, other places they traded. Ulf, the older boy of the two, who were learning their trade from their fathers, had once scared her by shouting at her when she had been sent back with fish that the cook said was rotten the second time. When Ulf reached out to grab her, Osrith had charged at him, thrown him onto the seaweedy stone of the harbour and given him a black eye. She had had to be pulled off by his father and his uncle, who laughed at the boy for being hit by a girl. From high up in the ramparts the royal guards had laughed too, at her ferocity. Since then, Ulf had refused to land at the harbour if Osrith was there, and Gert, the younger boy, had been sent with the castle's fish. Gert liked Osrith and would have given her the fish free if she'd have asked, just to have spoken to her, something which Osrith found amusing, and caused Constantine to sulk. Constantine, who spent most of his day when he was not studying or practicing sword skills, followed Osrith around, much to her annoyance, chose the days she had spent in Gert's easy company to enact cruel tricks on her. He would steal her food, and giving it to the horses he would throw his night bucket at her or foul a passage with it that she had spent the afternoon cleaning. He would perennially lean over railings and around corners pulling her hair. His cousin Domhnall had once found her shut out of the castle one cold, rainy night and, when he had persuaded her to talk, got out of her that it had been Constantine who had ordered her outside to collect his sword that he'd left out, and had barred the gate, laughing at her as she got drenched. But, spending more time with Constantine was the reason she had been summoned to see the king one early summer's morning. Osrith had been terrified as Seinid took her to the throne room. Had they found out that she was really Edra of Bibbenberg, and had they struck a deal with her uncle Alfric to have her back? But instead, she was being withdrawn her from many serving and cleaning duties, except for help in the kitchens. Instead, the black-haired, pale-faced king looked at Osrith with his grey eyes and then at his son. Constantine, wild heir, Domhnall, explained that she was to come whenever Constantine required, and would have a room of her own close to his. And you should teach him the sword skills that have been taught to you. Domhnall laughed, as King dipped his head in acknowledgement of these decrees. And so she had. It was not as taxing as scrubbing, cooking, sewing and cleaning, and she had been given a new set of clothes, leather, with new wool undergarments, but it certainly was not as quiet. But, despite all this, Osrith could not shake the shadow of suspicion that she felt on occasions, when a conversation between two nobles, or a noble and a monk, disappeared around a corner as she approached. As the months wore on, summer gave way to a mellow autumn and a crisp winter, and Osrith reasoned that if she was to be used in a trade with her uncle, it would be done by now. "I'm coming, Gert," called Osrith, from the balustrade's crenulations that morning. From the stone steps, Constantine pulled a face, then threw a stone down to the fisher boy, which hit him hard on the cheek. Osrith had got down to the harbour just as Gert let up a howl in pain, his blue eyes reddening and filling with tears as he held a hand to his face. By the time she had got across to Gert, he had boarded the fishing boat, leaving no fish behind. "Why did you do that?" demanded Osrith, as Constantine sloped down the steps, his mouth curved into a smirk, like his father the king. "He wants to touch you," Constantine complained. "He wants to kiss you. He talks to me, and likes to touch my hair." "Constantine," Osrith protested. "He is only a boy." "A boy who wants to hump you," Constantine grumbled, moodily, his pale grey eyes fixed on her. Osrith laughed, combing her golden blonde hair behind her ears. "No one will do that. I will kill them first." Then she scowled back at Constantine. "Now, I haven't got any fish to take to Glimmery," she lashed out at him. Constantine, who only just moved out of the way in time to avoid the strike. "You have to come with me," Constantine demanded, looking triumphant in the direction of the retreating fishing boat. "Domhnall wants to speak to you." 88,888,888. Down the dark stone passages Osrith strode, following Constantine, his black hair whipping behind him like a snake. They passed the stones within the castle's walls, on which the strange markings of swirl animals and men in armor fighting a battle had been carved. Pictish writing. Constantine had once sneered at her. "I can read it, you cannot." But Osrith had stopped to look at them many times, tracing the patterns with her fingers. Elasate had mocked her when Osrith had told her the reason why she was so long cleaning the passage, and had explained that reading the pictures was a case of looking at them and remembering the stories of that history, in a rhyme or poem or song. Why did Domnall want to see her? Osrith wondered as Constantine crossed the inner courtyard towards the royal rooms, clearly enjoying her discomfort. Maybe he was angry that she had continued Constantine's battle when the boy had stumbled. That would explain Constantine's triumph. "You have skill with that blade of yours," Sainid, the head of King's household guard, had told, after she had come across the practice battle between Domnall and Constantine on her way back from the market. Osrith scooped up Constantine's blade, which had skittered over the stones when Constantine had stumbled and missed in a parry. "Go on," Domnall had encouraged, as she held it as she had been taught, by Sir Brit, to the amusement of the Bibbenberg household guard and to the disapproval of Father Booker. Osrith had deflected, ducked and moved fast enough to tire the heir to the throne, as Sainid looked on amused, and Constantine scowled at her. "You should teach Constantine," Domnall had told her, and Sainid had asked her who had taught her. "My father," Osrith had lied. "Though we were poor, he believed I and my brother should be taught the same. We both could die at the hands of the Danes, and I should have the skill to keep myself alive." "Your father sounds like a good man," Sainid had told her, kindly. "It is a pity that your family died at the great battle." But he hadn't, of course, Osrith had to remind herself. Though she kept up the pretense as if it were truth, when she went to bed at night Osrith always prayed for Uhtred, for her baby brother, her uncle's child when he married her mother, and for Father Booker, praying to God for their souls, for their lives, for her to see them again. "Come on," Constantine sneered, holding open the door to the royal rooms. Osrith barely came to this part of the castle, and, through the open door, the opulence of goods from near and far off lands. She might have known Constantine's manners would have come at a cost. As she stepped over the door frame he stuck his foot out and Osrith went sprawling on the hard stone floor. "Don't speak to that boy again," Constantine insisted, imperiously, and Osrith struggled to her feet and hurried after him as he approached the priceless inner door made of dense ebony wood. Osrith had tried to teach Constantine the skills she knew. If he turned up at all at the appointed time, the royal prince would spend most of the time sulking, or, if he did try to fight her, gave up within a few minutes. As such, he would rarely win and would sulk at her, and trick her spitefully if she won, as she invariably did. His favorite one being to shut her out on the window ledge of his room, having by ordering Osrith to close the shutters. The first time, Osrith had nearly frozen to death as it had begun to snow, and she had let him win the battles a few times. But her lack of effort had been noticed by Sainid, who had reported this to Domnall. The usually even-tempered Domnall had shouted at Osrith for a long time, reminding her of her place and threatened to turn her out of the castle if she would not fight properly. It had been he who, one sleety night, had discovered Constantine's trick and had beaten him for his unkindness before taking a shivering Osrith in, the truth of why she had avoided fighting coming out, and Constantine got another lambing. The dueling had continued, with Osrith offering excellent opposition to Constantine. But the boy, a year younger than Osrith, was too often bettered in the beginning, by a swift and cunning Osrith. Yet, as he grew, Constantine's strength turned the battles to his favor and he delighted in. If Osrith felt tired, or her aches in her lower stomach and back had caused her to be less lithe than she would ordinarily be, pressing his victory hard, Sainid would intervene, when he hit her in defeat, and Domnall would be told, his displeasure at Constantine's dishonorable behavior being heard through even Donata's 3 feet thick walls. Constantine banged hard on the thick dark wood of the throne room's door. It opened immediately. Osrith felt self-conscious in the presence of the splendor within. Her hair was disheveled from the wind by the key, and she was wearing her old clothes, in which she did her household jobs. By contrast, the throne room was paneled in the same thick ebony wood, its richness picked put by tall candles which flashed off the rich wool fabric that hung around the throne. And there, in the very center of the room, Constantine's father, king of the Picts, stared at her. She sighed, fear seeping into her now. Did he suspect her? Osrith worried, as her pulse quickened, as her heart rate increased, and she lowered her head deferentially, as a peasant might, trembling and shaking, trying to display as much fear as she could, most of it genuine. We are given to understand that you oppose my son in his sword work. Osrith could not help but look up, her eyes resting on those of the king, the same pale grey eyes resting on her as Constantine's did, as if stripping layers from her mind and examining her very darkest and deepest secrets. She nodded. Osrith spoke her name slowly. You may be wondering why I asked to see you. Osrith said nothing, but dipped her head and looked at the floor, bowing to the king of the Picts. Constantine, I am ashamed to say, does not make any effort to learn your excellent skills, nor learn much else, a habit that has come to the attention of my general Sainid. Here it came, Osrith thought, feeling fear run through her. She flexed her left hand. Though long-healed, she was conscious of the arrow wound, which had penetrated right through and left Osrith unable to close it fully, and a scar on both sides. I understand that you retrieved your father's sword from him before he and your family were killed at the great battle last year. Osrith continued to look down. Yes, your grace. Osrith spoke softly. Her father? What did know about him? Perhaps. No. Was the king really not confronting her about being Edra? Her mind had been filling with plans of escape, to get back to the kitchens. To her corner when she'd been a servant. Reach into the spring. Retrieve her silver. Wait for Gert's family and pay her way out of Alba. You fought without fear when that Norseman threatened Constantine. I know, he added, as Osrith made to deny it. I saw you. That Norseman was the brother of Ivar the Boneless, oft be named Sigurd, so, interjected, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. In the same way as when Constantine sneered at her. You know of whom I speak? Osrith bowed her head again. Yes, sir. The Norse threaten again. You, Osrith, are a bright, you learn fast, and you have superb sword skill for a child of your age. Soon we will face them in battle. Constantine, he looked across to his son, who returned his father's gaze, must be ready to fight. You will by his side from the moment he awakes to the moment he sleeps. You will attend his lessons, eat at his table, and, most importantly, you will teach my son the swordwork that you know. In this aspect, you have authority over him. Osrith hesitated. She was to teach her unwilling tormentor all she knew about fighting. She looked across to Constantine, who was looking sullenly at his father. Constantine could fight, that was the thing. He was strong, and getting stronger the more he grew. Yet he lacked the experience to anticipate blows, a skill which could turn the fortune of any warrior, and worse, lacked motivation. Then, it is agreed, Domhnall confirmed, as his 11-year-old cousin began to storm in protest. You will begin tomorrow, Osrith. 88,888,888. A month after being appointed Constantine's constant companion, a storm, breaking the heat of the night, rumbled across the sky. From her tiny room, Osrith opened her drowsy eyes. She did not mind the tasks, eating meals with the sullen prince nor lessons with him, and it had been quite satisfying instructing him how to hold his sword and how to swing it, as she herself had been taught, knowing she could shout at him to behave and not get into trouble herself. But, by heaven, the days were tiring. That day, for example, as well as instructing him on planning an attack, Osrith had also been in the chapel where a monk, Owen, had taught Constantine the history of Pitland and discussed the country's allies. Eochaid, a cousin of was king of the Strathclyde Cymric, Osrith learned, and that as well as related to Constantine, Bride, king of the Picts, had defeated Ecgfrithiding, 200 years before, then married his sister. Osrith was amazed, and more amazed still to think that she and Constantine were distantly related. Then you will be king of the Picts and Gaels? Osrith had asked Constantine, as Owen retreated to fetch another manuscript. I will be, Constantine replied, his voice, for once, reasonable. But there is trouble. My uncle's bastard son Giric claims Pictland. His mother was a Pictish lady of Bride's line, and since my father was Dulriadan, a lot of people would like Giric to be king rather than Domhnall, or me. Constantine touched the manuscript. Yet, my father wanted what his father wanted. My grandfather wanted to rule over all of Alba, a ling of kings. He got his chance for the Pictish throne when the Norse invaded. Only the Dulriadans, Bigales, have the resources to fight, to keep on fighting. We have support of the church. Constantine picked up the manuscript and traced the letters with his fingers. Strathclyde and Pictland have too many heathens. We Gales have always sworn, on oath to Street Columba, to destroy out heathen practices, groves burned, temples pulled down, and so on, under pain of death. Yet, too many live amongst us, in plain sight, hiding their resistance to Christ. What? Constantine added, scornfully. Osrith was staring at him, open-mouthed. You think I am a dolt and don't know anything? Try applying the same to your sword. Osrith chided, and was rewarded with the book slammed down onto her arm. This resulted in Osrith grabbing Constantine by the forearms, throwing him to the floor, where he fought to be free, and they'd rolled across the flagstone floor, whereupon the monk Owen had thrown a jar of manuscript water over them both. With days like those, it was no wonder that Osrith found herself closing her eyes as soon as her head touched the straw mattress, dreaming of nothing until the next day came in a flash. The thunder rolled again, louder this time, and accompanied by a distant crackle of lightning. It was then she heard it, a sound not unlike a distressed cat might make, yowling and calling as if in pain. Osrith opened her eyes again and sprung out of bed, padding over to her door, clad in her cotton undergarments, long on her arms and legs, which she yelled up to save her falling on them. In the corridor, the noise sounded louder, and she crept, arm raised, ready to fight. The sound got louder as she reached Constantine's room, and Osrith put a hand to the iron ring that opened the latch. The noise came again, more pitiful this time, finishing with the yell as lightning flashed overhead, followed immediately by a roll of thunder. Osrith opened the door and looked around, alert. Last time she had heard noises in the night, Constantine had been hiding and had locked her in the privy for a day. But this time, Constantine was not hiding. Under the covers, a sobbing ball cried put again as the storm exploded overhead once more. Osrith rushed over to him, sitting next to him and putting out a hand. The boy felt out for her, then took her hand, pushing back the covers little by little. His face was a mess of tears and terror, and he shrank as lightning and then thunder seemed to demand entry to his room. Osrith felt her heart go out to the boy, so sullen and sour most of the time. He was still only a child. She pulled the blankets down on one side of Constantine, and slipped in next to him, still holding his hand, saying nothing except, Oikmuth, quietly by his ear, good night. It was next to each other hand in hand that Elasade, the head of the household staff, found them the next morning. 88,888,888. I will say, sir, Osrith said apprehensively, as summer drew to its highest, as you have asked me to be truthful. I do not think Constantine is ready to fight. At least, not ready to fight and live. She had been instructed to report back to the head of the household guard on a weekly basis, and she had been taken aback when Sainid had asked her, bluntly. He was, Osrith felt, doing well. But Constantine was only 11, it was madness for his uncle to have taken him out on the battlefield the year before, the time she had saved him. It wouldn't have happened at Wittenberg. But this was Dumnotzer, not Bibbenberg. While her former home was impenetrable, with just a wharf open to the sea to catch a ration of fish when under siege, Dumnotzer was at the center of a community, of the monastery and the village. The Norse came without warning, and destroyed everything. Constantine did not have luxury of being ready, he had to fight, or he would die anyway. Can he do it? Asked General Sainid. The young man had his long black Gaelish hair plaited in one long braid. He looked at Osrith earnestly. No, Osrith said. "But I am sure you will tell the king that he is. Are you ready?" Sainid's question surprised her. "When you fought last year, was your ferocity an attack out of fear? Or, could you do it again?" 88,888,888. How they pulled it off, Osrith could not tell. Constantine was the weak link, where the plan would unravel, if it ever did. "I'll talk to him," Sainid said, his black hair catching the light. "I will explain that you are fighting in his stead as a model. He will understand that. He is strong," Osrith emphasized, rubbing her left forearm, where he had legged her up 2 days ago and trod on it, hard. "But he cannot anticipate his enemy. He is too young. Long I have known it. He is not yet 12, and you are 13 next harvest." Sainid stared at her. 12? Why, I would have given you to be 14, or 15. Sainid lowered his head, looking at the glow on her golden hair as the morning sun warmed it. Osrith turned away, looking over the battlements. Where would the battle be? More importantly, when would have his spies? No doubt. Why was she doing this? It was a question Osrith had asked herself many times over the last few months. She could go, she could leave. Why hadn't she? "Let us go over the plan again," Osrith said. "You will bring Constantine to the armory, he will dress," Sainid said, slowly. "I will bring him to the kitchens. He will take off his armor and you shall wear it. I will explain that he has the best vantage point to watch you." A skein of geese soared overhead. Osrith looked up. "You will take the armor and dress, you will take his sword." "My sword?" Osrith pressed. Sainid nodded in acquiescence. "You will dress and take your sword, and you will flank Domhnall and fight," Osrith thought. And, just then, the image of her brother, holding aloft Sobrit's head dissolved into her mind. He would be fighting now, somewhere. He would be vanquishing the Danes, Osrith was certain. Osrith tightened her right hand around Fedor's sword, and to King's general nodded. 88,888,888. It was only one short day until uncertain peace shifted to bloody war. Standing beside Domhnall, the king before them, the Norse, led by huge warrior, long blonde hair from under his helmet, charged towards them. Osrith held her sword tightly, stiffness spreading in her limbs. She shook them out, flexing her damaged left hand as it clutched Constantine's and blinked in the wally morning fog. Osrith never remembered battles, just snippets like a dream. As the warriors came past her, she moved as if her limbs were feathers. As she ducked and weaved, she strode out with the nobility, sword high, as horses streamed past her, as if solidifying from the mist itself. Domhnall swiping at body after body as they swiped down at the infantry, before sliding down from their steed to continue organized death on foot. Before her, men charged, howling like the fury of the Aesir filling the foggy arena. Some were that of his kin, Eochaid, king of Strathclyde. And Osrith stepped forward, into the running line of a Norseman with wild blonde hair, without even a look back to the Chaldees monks, who had lined the riverbank. Monks, 50 or 60 of them, charged into the fray, and behind them, the golden heads of the Strathclyde Welsh shone through the Smurf's ambition to seize her family's territory of Bernicia was unbounded, Osrith knew, and, were it not for the Norse, he would have sought to fulfill this Pictish-held ambition generation after generation. She could cut and run, Osrith considered, as she fought 2 Norse, before one Becane engaged with 2 of its household guard. But, if she did that, she would never find Utad. She would never see Benbenberg again, free of the tyranny of Elfric. She would never even make it off the field of battle. Hours later, and somehow, the miracle had happened. The Picts had forced the Norse off the field, the Strathclyde Cymric chasing them towards the coast. 2 lines of attack had been enough to confuse in the fog. Some had staggered into boats, seeking help from Northumbria, from the new king in Cumbraland, and Guthard, whose reign was sanctioned by the Danes. But King returned and had losses too. Osrith scuttled, as soon as she was able, to the kitchen, whereupon she removed Constantine's clothing before kneeing him in the stomach. The astonished boy looked at her, betrayed. But Sainid, who had now also returned, explained he needed to be shaken and dishevelled on meeting his uncle. And he nodded, accepting as Sainid removed her armor, looking in horror at a wound to her shoulder and leg. "I've had worse," Osrith said, thinking of her pierced hand. Her uncle had sanctioned that. She tried to wave away the general, but the warrior would not have it. "Be in the throne room in half an hour," he instructed Constantine, who, Osrith realized, was shaking, whether with fear or anger, as Sainid led her to the kitchen. Ignoring Glymaris raging at his kitchen being commandeered as a makeshift hospital and, in turn, fussing over Osrith too, Sainid pulled off her leather clothing, and then tearing off her wool undergarments. Osrith stood there in nothing but her boots as he bathed her arm and her leg with water infused with precious salt. She shivered, though it was warm, feeling shame that the man's eyes were upon her nakedness. Sainid seemed to sense this, and was swift, before leading her to the armory, giving her new clothes. "You fought valiantly," Sainid said, pushing her arm carefully into her new jacket. That meant a lot coming from him. When she'd struggled into everything, she sagged, tiredness overcoming her. "Go to the throne room too," Sainid instructed, his blue eyes twinkling as he smiled at her. "Stay in the shadows, listen. Learn. There is a plot against one to install a Pictish king once again.